FlatsClass fans, Captain CA here. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite partners, and that's Shimano. They just sent me a brand new Baitcaster. It's not new in the marketplace. It's just, hey, they were behind on back orders and I finally got it. So I want to spool it up. I'm going to spool it up with fluorocarbon. That's right. So this tip is more about how to spool line on a baitcaster than it is about the fluorocarbon itself. We're going to talk about that after I cast because it's kind of a sensitive subject right now. But everyone will know about it in a couple of more weeks. But for now, I'm going to take you over here and let's do this. So if you haven't seen one of these tranks up close, this is the 150 HG. It is a really handsome looking reel and it's the right size. I'm gonna probably put this, I picked a rod out, I already know what I'm gonna put on it. I'm gonna put the 7-foot medium Terramar XX, and I'll be throwing a lot of probably my Mirrolure, smaller top waters, finer wire jigs and things like that. This happens to be a 7.2 to 1 gear ratio. It's also pretty good if I put it on a heavier rod, such as maybe a 7.5 foot medium heavy fast. I could probably even throw Carolina rigs and things like that with it. But for demonstration purposes, I'm going to put it on a rod that I use all the time in one of my my faves, and that's going to be the Shimano Terramar XX in the 7-foot medium fast. So let's put it on the rod and get to it. And just to let you see the rod, this is again Shimano Terramar's XX. If you've been watching this channel for any length of time, here I'll give you the specs on it as well. If you've been watching it for any length of time, hands down, this is my favorite rod series, especially aimed at all you inshore guys, for sure. I am a big fan of some of their bass action rods like the Zodius and the X Pride, and I use those quite a bit in a lot of videos for specific types of fishing. But most of the time, if I'm fishing on the show and things like that that you've watched, you see me with a Terramar XX. These things have both high power X and spiral X technologies, which give it an anti-twist blank, very responsive, very quick, great fish fighting tool, and lends itself to be a very accurate casting reel. So you're probably wondering, why fluorocarbon? Well, we're going to do a video on it, and I've done videos in the past on fluorocarbon. But now, Shimano themselves, well, they've come out with a line, or will be coming out with a line, that I've been experimenting with, and I can't talk a lot about it, but I took my leader box here, and it's sitting in the middle of it, because when I need a portable system to spool line, I take out one of my leader wheels and I put in whatever line I'm going to spool up, whether that's braid or if it's going to be fluorocarbon in this instance. And the fluorocarbon has been a huge advantage in clear water. I mean, I can't even tell you. And it's just certain techniques in inshore fishing work better with fluorocarbon. But, you got to be using a casting reel. So that's why I wanted to use the casting reel in this demonstration. So I'm going to run all of the fluorocarbon through the guides, and then I'm going to show you the little knot system and stuff that I use to tie it right here on the spool itself. So give me a minute to get that set up, and I'll be right back. Okay, went to get my glasses because we're going to be tying a knot, and I don't want to make a mistake. I've already took the liberty of stringing the fluorocarbon through all the guides, and I pushed it through the winder and around the spool and out back the winder. A lot of these reels that you're gonna you're going to be buying will have like a wiffle spool, and you can literally stick that tag end, try not to do anything crazy here, you can stick that tag end in one of the wiffle holes, and then you can just wind it 2 or 3 turns and then pull it off, and then you don't have to do all that finagling with the biters to reach in there and pull it out. And, well, it takes a few minutes. If you look right there, you can see that little divot in the middle of the spool. You can see where your knot is going to be placed. I'm going to coordinate it after I tie it on with a simple 2-turn like uni knot. I'm going to put it right in that hole, and then I'm going to take a couple of spins around so that you can actually see what it looks like before we spool the entire reel up. So I'm going to show that on the big camera right now. I've got it to a point now where I can tie a little arbor knot, or what I would call a 2-turn clinch knot, because I want a small knot. A lot of anglers will just tie an overhand knot or 2 overhand knots, and granny knots, if you will, and bite down, and that's enough, especially when you're using something like fluorocarbon. Now, if I were going to spool braid on here, I would probably take a cheaper line in the 6 or 8 pound variety of mono, and I would fill 20% of my spool up, because braid's so much thinner than actual mono or fluorocarbon. I would take that 6 or 8 pound braid, and why so light? I'm using it more for filler than anything else, with no intention of ever reaching the backing on neither a cast or fighting a fish. So I'd fill 20% of the spool up with that, and then I'd tie on a braid that might be, in a lot of cases, if I need casting distance, I put 20 pound braid on. If I need what I would call medium strength fishing around cover, I'd probably put 30, maybe 40. And if I was fishing structure, like I knew I was going to have to leverage fish, I would go as high as 50 or 65 pound braid. Yes, I said 50 or 65 pound braid. But when I'm putting on mono, or if I'm putting on fluorocarbon, I just use what's on the spool and I'll get there. So I'm going to tie a quick 2-turn uni, once around the standing, twice, and I'll tell you why. Twice. And that way I can tighten it up like so. And what I like to do is I can slide it down in there, get it exactly where I want it, and I want to move that winder to the center as well before I get started. So I'm going to move that right to the center. Boom, I'm there. So I tighten that down by pulling on the standing line. I got it right where I want it in the center. Then I'll pull back out now that I got it tight, and I'll take these boomerang snips. This is going to sound self-serving because it is. These are my branded ones, but they are made by this Boomerang Corporation. If you're not familiar with them, they are dynamite for cutting tag ends really short. So I'm going to cut this one short, like super short. Then I'm going to tighten it back up. It's going to go right down in there. I'm going to spin my spool a little bit, get that knot in that little hole that I was telling you about that is on this spool, and that will make it perfect for me. I'm going to manipulate it into that spot. So it gets right there on that hole. And I'll pull it forward. It's right in the hole. Tighten it down. I got my winder perfectly in the middle, and I'm ready to spool. So by these little leader boxes here are really convenient. So I'm going to set this down on the ground, and I'm going to start winding it and filling the spool and talking a little bit more on what you should be paying attention to. So let me set it down. I'll be right back. All right, so I'm quick to make sure I'm dead in the center with my line winder. And I'm going to get a couple on here so it centers up nice. And I want a smooth start. Now here's something that you need to take into account. You want to be lined up square on how you're reeling your line onto the spool. So I want the line in front of me. I go through all the guides. You can take a shortcut and run it through 2 guides if you want, if you're sitting in your boat and you got to re-spool real quick. But I want to literally be pointing right at the spool. You also want to make sure your star drag is cranked down. You want it to be tight. You can't have any slippage. So make sure your star drag is tight. Then you want to create some tension. Now with braid, because when braid is going through my fingers, it gets hot. So I will put a glove on so that I can hold the line and keep tension on it, and I'll keep it out in front of the baitcaster like so and start cranking it up. I don't want to spool it in a hurry or anything. I want everything straight. I don't want too much tension. I don't want too little tension. And it's something that you got to play with. You're also going to want, and I'll show this to you after we spool this up, you've got to have the line, when you're holding the spool, come off the top of the spool, not the bottom of the spool, or not where it's coiling off, especially if you're doing fluorocarbon. So you want the spool oriented that you're reeling on, where the line comes off the top of the spool and goes back on yours, so that it matches. Almost like if you're looking at an old school cassette player, where it comes off one reel, goes on the other reel on the top. Everything goes on the top. It's going on the top here, it's going to go off the top on my spool. So because this is fluorocarbon, I do not need a glove, so I'm just going to aim right down there at this, and I'm just going to spool this on. And it, with average pressure, because it is fluorocarbon, you don't want it springing off. I'm going to fill this to, if I had a heavier fluorocarbon, this is 14-pound fluorocarbon I'm putting on. And I'm doing it because I like to throw lighter lures with this particular rod, and I'm throwing for distance with this rod as well. So on this particular setup, because you got to consider the rod with the reel, even though I would throw 20-pound fluorocarbon on this as well, because of the rod as an element of what I'm doing, I'm just going to simply put 14 on here. And when you look at the rod specs, and I'll show those to you here in a second, when you look at the rod specs for this Terramar XX, it is for monos from, I believe, 8 to 14-pound diameter. So I'm going to the topper or upper limit of that particular setup for the rod. Now I'm going to fill this up with, there's a little angle or lip on this spool. I'm going to show it to you, but I'm going to fill it up just underneath that. On braid, I'd fill it all the way up, but on this, because it's fluorocarbon and it fluffs a little bit when you cast because of its memory, I'll probably fill it full, but I won't fill it as much as I would fill it if I were spooling 20-pound braid on it, for instance. So I'm right there right now. That's about perfect. That is the full spool. Now, let me show you what I was talking about. Stay tuned. Okay, protect the innocent, I'm going to cover the label. But you need the fluorocarbon to come off the top of the spool. So you don't want it coming down here, you want it to come off the top, because you're reeling it through the guide, the sidewinder, and on the top of the spool and around and around and around. So it has to match. So that's how you remember. So that's one of the things you need to remember. Also, with fluorocarbon, I don't fill the spool completely full, because remember, there's a little bit of memory. Now this is some really soft fluorocarbon, and it doesn't have the memory that a lot of less expensive fluorocarbons have. But as you can see here, I left a little bit of room on my spool. That way, when I swing, and I told you I put this on here to make longer casts with medium and small weighted lures, that's important to me. So I know I'm going to be swinging harder with this, so I want to make sure that I'm not overfilling the spool like I would probably braid. All right, now here are the measurements, if you will, or the specs. You see the one that says mono on there? I'm right there at that 14-pound diameter. So that's what I'm going to throw on this rod. Now, if I were to pick a medium heavy rod, like I said earlier, I would be able to go to 16, 18, and 20-pound fluorocarbon. Just as a bonus tip in this, and I'll say this when I do the actual fluorocarbon video for this new fluorocarbon, I prefer 16 for most general purpose fishing for me. But 14 is pretty close, and it's going to give me a little added distance, and on this setup it was perfect. It timed out where the rep had sent me the reel, and I wanted to get it on here, so this really turned out to be a good video to do with the timing of the product arriving. So with all that in mind, there's just a few things you gotta keep in your head when doing this. Make sure the spool is oriented with the line coming off the top. Make sure you're putting it on with tension, but not too much tension. Make sure your star drag's locked down. Make sure you start with the line winder in the middle of your reel. Make sure your knot and your line are in the center of the reel. Fortunately, on the Tranks, there's that little tiny hole there that you can tuck your knot into, so you don't have a problem with that. Once you get it fed in the center, you can cinch it down and it takes care of itself. But if you do all these things, you'll have a perfectly even spooled reel and everything works out. Now, with braid, when I'm spooling braid on bait casting gear, many times I will put it on with a gloved hand, like I said, or I'll wet a rag or silicone a rag or something like that, just to kind of get some of the excess chalky color stuff off. But that's really unnecessary with this particular fluorocarbon. This is perfect the way it comes off, and I promise you in the future I'm going to have that video for you where I show you all of that stuff. Okay, if you like what you're seeing, you're learning stuff here on FlatsClass YouTube, we're putting you in the know, especially with how many of you guys are migrating over, throwing baitcasters and stuff like that. Just reach over here and hit that subscription button and hit the notification bell so that you don't miss another one of these great tips. Please give us the thumbs up like, because that helps us trend better on YouTube, and in the end that brings more people watching us, and the more people that watch us, the better material I can bring all of you each and every day. That's right, we do these every day now. So without much more to talk about, hopefully this little short quick tip will put you on the right path of spooling up your bait casters properly for all you saltwater guys. Now I'm going to go work on another one.